Reverend Billy Graham has died. Word is circulating right now. He was 99 years old, born in 1918. Of course, the name is a household name in America, one of our most famous ministers. In fact, part of his congregation has been in Parkland, Florida, doing crisis management after the massacre there. He preached around the world, speaking to presidents and world leaders. He has literally been a facet of spiritual life since the 50s. In this country.
Absolutely. He has been a spiritual advisor to all sorts of presidents, from Harry Truman to Barack Obama. So joining us now, our reporter and editor-at-large for CNN Politics, Chris Cillizza, and CNN political analyst David Gregory, who, of course, has written a book on faith. And it's hard to underscore enough just how influential this man has been in our lives.
Well, not just in politics and, of course, in faith and popularizing faith as a televangelist. Someone who did it, especially after World War II in Los Angeles. He's a famous part of the Louis Zamperini story of Unbroken, who went to a Billy Graham revival and his life was changed and became a born-again Christian and stopped drinking. And so it was Billy Graham who was really one of the forerunners of the televangelist movement. His parents were raised as Calvinist Protestants. He joined the Southern Baptist Convention, and so he popularized faith and the evangelical movement like no one else had, and at the same time had this incredible political resonance, some of which was controversial. He was close friends with Richard Nixon and had a blind spot for Richard Nixon and some of his anti-Semitism, but didn't shy away from being close to presidents, from speaking out about communism, from offering advice on matters of war and peace. And more up to date, and for a president that I covered, George W. Bush, he, even at an advanced age, was incredibly influential in the lives of our leaders. It was in conversation with Billy Graham that President Bush said that he found a renewed relationship with God, became a born-again Christian himself, and set himself on a course that was so important in his own life. So this is just a tremendous loss in the world of faith, in our national life, in our political life. Billy Graham was a titan of this country.
Chris, the Time magazine once referred to Billy Graham as the Pope of the Protestant movement. And for a long time, he was the cohesive point for the evangelical movement in this country. Yep. He was someone who favored non-denominational Christianity, which was a very new idea in the 50s and 60s. People really stuck to their churches. Obviously, his parents were Calvinist. He had started with the Baptist church, but he started to engender this idea that it's not about the organization, it's about the faith and how it is lived as a mission.
That's right. And I would say, I think David touched on this, but I think the influence of Billy Graham on mainstreaming, evangelical thought into politics, particularly Republican politics, 1980s, 1990s, into the 2000s. The evangelical movement as a political force has faded somewhat. The election of Donald Trump, I think, is in some ways a coda to that, a bookmark. But in the 1980s, the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, Billy Graham's influence and the evangelical movement's influence on, particularly in social politics, in the conservative movement, vast. I mean, literally almost impossible to overstate the ways in which he helped transform what sort of conservatism, what republicanism, particularly on the social side, meant, and what kind of voters made up the Republican coalition for those years. I do think we are, I don't know if it's a one-time change tied to Donald Trump or a broad change, but we're in a change period from that. But for 2+ decades, that was the dominant or one of the dominant voices within the conservative movement.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that what you're touching on and what David can build on is that he believed in sort of the big tent philosophy. He insisted, even in the 50s, that his revivals meetings be integrated racially. And I was interested to read that he bailed out Martin Luther King Jr. from jail after he was arrested for some of his demonstrations, and then insisted on preaching together as well.
Right, and the non-denominational movement, that modern evangelical movement, which went beyond the established dominations, was then, continues to be controversial, but also incredibly popular because of how accessible Billy Graham was. And then modern day evangelists like a Joel Osteen are incredible in their reach around the world, and in how I've been to Joel Osteen's services, how incredibly diverse and huge his Sunday morning services are. And Billy Graham was really the forerunner of that. Making it more acceptable, breaking down a lot of barriers, which also engendered criticism within evangelical circles, and certainly does in among modern evangelicals. There are a lot of interdenominational fights, but Billy Graham was really one of the first to break through all of that, to reach a broader audience, and then to add what Chris was referring to, this incredible political influence, as kind of America's preacher, certainly the preacher to the most powerful figures in the country.